Pen Made Mightier without bullets.
Hey guys, it's Kirk. So we're going to be doing something a little bit different this week, and you can kind of already tell what I'm talking about, because I'm actually going to be the one talking to you about some cool writing elements instead of Gideon this week. He's still recovering from that little bit of nastiness that's been afflicting him for quite a minute now. I'm going to go ahead and tell you it's going to be me kind of running the show for a little bit, just until Gideon can get his strength back up and recuperate and be, presentable for camera again. It's okay, he's totally fine, but if you totally want to leave him and get well soon, you can drop it down in the comments right below, or you can actually shoot us a message on Facebook or on Twitter, or through Gmail, or through smoke signals, or through bashing in your computer until we actually get the message. But for the meantime then, let's get to it. Okay, so slight disclaimer, I had to come up with the script in order to keep myself on track and to keep the points flowing. So if I seem a little bit distracted, it's because I'm just reading off things to make sure that you guys get the best information possible. So I ask for your forgiveness now. Thank you. Narration is one of writing's biggest pillars. It's the tone, the tempo, and the voice of your story. And that voice can sound like Morgan Freeman talking about penguins, to Michael J. Fox talking about his dog and cat friends, to Fran Drescher making you want to burn whatever it is that you're watching or reading, pour bleach down your ear and hope that your nephew avenges your death. But you have no story without narration. And that's why to truly enjoy and immerse yourself into a work of fiction, you, the consumer, have to suspend your disbelief and trust that what you're being told is true. Otherwise, you can't enjoy what you've been watching or reading. And now a clever writer can play on this trust to surprise and pull at your emotions by making you question what is true and what isn't, so as to leave you, the audience, to debate everything that you just watched. And a popular way of doing this is through what's called the unreliable narrator, a term that was coined by Wayne C. Booth in his 1961 book, The Rhetoric Fiction. In it, he defines an unreliable narrator as a narrator, whether in literature, film, or theater, whose credibility has been seriously compromised. Now, how that integrity is compromised is up to you, the writer, but we're going to examine 4 ways that you can do this successfully: through insanity, through lying, through bias, and through comedy. First, let's start with insanity. Using insanity to discredit your narrator is a catch-22. It can either give you creative freedom to do some cool things, or it can blow up in your face if you use it as an excuse to write plot lines that you didn't think through far enough. Now, you should do plenty of research about whatever mental illness that you decide to use, so that way you can handle it with respect. Because if you don't, you'll get crucified on Tumblr or get told off by Robert Downey Jr. in blackface. Now, there are some good examples out there of using mental illness to influence your characters. Off the top of my head, we have Girl Interrupted, A Beautiful Mind, Shutter Island, and The Secret Window if you squint hard enough and remember that it was a Tim Burton film. But the movie I wanted to be focusing on is actually the one that we can't talk about. First, they don't name Edward Norton's character. He's just referred to as the narrator, which is a big red flag there. But he's essentially a blank slate that's telling us his story of his adventures through rehab, trying to come over insomnia, which we've all been through at some point in our lives, so even more relatable than just being the blank slate. But by having Norton as a blank slate, we find ourselves projecting ourselves onto him and his situation and find the same appeal in the other characters, especially in Fred Durden, like he does. And because we're enamored with Fred's shenanigans as much as Edward Norton is when the twist happens, we're then suddenly thinking over everything that's happened in the movie up until that point and finding ourselves questioning what was real and what wasn't. Now, I will note that this trick could have easily been broken if Norton had been more peace of mind to question everything that was going around him, and especially with character interactions as he was going out through the movie, to sort of piece together, oh, hey, something is completely off here. And that's why mental illness can be tricky, because not only do you want to be respectful to the source material, but you don't want to make it a caricature. Because if you do wind up making it a caricature, then it just becomes, well, inappropriate for what you're trying to do. And if you don't do the research and give the proper respect it deserves, then, well, good luck with that one. Now, another tricky way that you can have your narrator become unreliable is by having them be a liar. And I say that it's tricky because there's an easy trap that you can fall to if you're not too careful. If you think that your plot needs work, and if you want to keep information hidden for a big plot twist, don't use this to cover this up. Because if there is no way for the audience to tell what's going on, then you end up with instances like M. Night Shyamalan's Lady in the Water. Nobody's going to end up caring because they don't really see it, or they see it too far in advance because you're just trying too hard to say, oh, it's not this, or it's not what you're thinking of. However, there is a correct way of doing this, and I think the best example out there is by examining The Usual Suspects. The Usual Suspects were surprisingly straightforward in telling that you're going to be lied to because, well, Kevin Spacey's character Verbal is our narrator, and he's a con man. And you can't really expect a con man to tell you the full truth, especially when he's talking to cops, but we're willing to believe that part of what he's saying is true despite this, because how else are we supposed to enjoy the movie if we don't at least assume that part of what he's saying has some truth to it? By telling us in the beginning that we're going to be lied to, it actually makes the story more believable. We're no longer morally obligated to hold Burble up to some high standard of truth, because we already know some of his background, we know his profession, and therefore we can understand that he's not exactly telling the whole truth. So with that complication out of the way, we can actually immerse ourselves into the story. Especially since the entire time we're trying to guess who the Soze character is that's messing with all of our protagonists. We're not really going to be paying attention to figuring out, okay, here's this truth here, okay, that was probably a lie, okay, that might have been the truth, I guess I'll just have to keep watching to figure out. So the trick into using a line as an unreliable narrator just is all about making sure that you're honest with your intentions up front, that you're not trying to pull a fast one on people, because if you try to do that to cover up some mistake that you made in your plot, or to have some big plot twist so that way nobody can absolutely guess what's coming, it's going to blow up in your face. In that same train of thought, you can also have your narrator be biased, which frames the way that they deliver the information. Or you can make a bias against your narrator through outside information, so that way the audience calls into doubt exactly what it is that they're telling you. And one of the best examples that I can think of that uses this would be Tim Burton's Big Fish. See, with Big Fish, we actually have two narrators in Edward Bloom and his son, Will. Edward as the original narrator of his life's adventures, and then Will who's retelling his father's stories. But see, Will is upset that he's been lied to through his entire life by Edward because of all the tall tales that he tells without any just delivering of regular information, at least according to his point of view. So as we get to see Edward's plays play out, we have the lingering bias of Will that all this is, gobbledygook and nothing more, but as we come to find out, yes, there's been embellishment of details here and there, but the stories themselves have some truth to them instead of being complete works of fiction as Will had feared. But because we were brought into Will's bias in the beginning, we are then in turn biased towards the potential truth throughout the whole film. But what's cool about this particular narrative that they use here is that as the truth gets revealed, we get to see Will come to terms with his own bias, and he eventually sees the appeal in Edward spinning tales and spins one for him as he's on his deathbed. And then we get to see this bias further resolved by having all the characters in Edward's stories show up at his funeral, albeit not nearly as grandiose as they were played out to be, but still there nonetheless. You can use this type of narration to not only address biases that you may find in yourself, but what may also find in society around you, or what you may have seen in the past, to bring something up into light. So if you want a good example of this type of narrative, I would recommend checking out Ewan McGregor's adventures into No Johnny Depp in Hereland, but oh wait, there's Helen Bonham Carter. So okay, so we're still in a Tim Burton movie. Whew, I thought we got lost there. Okay, so finally we're going to take a look at having an unreliable narrative for purposes of comedy. Now, how can using this be funny? Well, there's a trope that we like to use here called innocent and accurate, which is basically a form of dramatic irony. Now, this is used to downplay dramatic or serious events, and by having your main character, in which case it's going to be our narrator, by not fully understanding what's going around and reporting events as they happen. And if you can see where I'm going with this, well, congratulations, you've earned yourself a box of chocolates, because it's Forrest Gump. Gump gets wrote into this unreliable narrator trope because of his mental illness that plays into his understanding of the events around him. Now, why is he not lumped into being the mental illness category? Well, that's because he's aware of what's going on. He just doesn't process it with the same morality and jadedness that someone else may have without his limitations. So as we're watching Gump win ridiculous foot races, go off to war and become a war hero, meet with President Kennedy, start a shrimp business, and then go off and chase after a goal that doesn't deserve him, we believe everything that he's telling us because we don't have any outside information telling anything to the contrary, and we also know that he doesn't have the capabilities of lying inside of himself because that's just not how he sees the world. But as we know through history and the historic events that he lives through, that things played out differently and people felt very differently than how he did, this is what makes it unreliable. And this is why we find parts of the story funny and also parts why sad, because if we had been in a situation, we would have processed everything differently. The most important thing when using any of these elements, if you want to make an unreliable narrator, is to respect the intelligence of the audience. You don't like being treated like you're stupid or feel like you've been gamed, and neither does your audience. So, if you're going to have an unreliable narrator, you'll want to use them to reveal your plot at a reasonable pace that makes sense, and instead of trying to red herring all of your mistakes. If you do that, eventually somebody will pick up what you're putting down, throw it out the window, and you'll find yourself with a really bad Rotten Tomatoes score. Thank you guys for being patient and for your understanding through my first video going at this, and there's going to be more from me in the next upcoming weeks about some other various things that I've been wanting to talk about for a minute, but just really haven't had the opportunity to really discuss. So while Gideon is recovering, and we definitely wish you a speedy recovery, man, I hope you guys liked what you watched. Hit like, comment, and subscribe, and share it around with your friends, and see if you can think of any other situations where having an unreliable narrator would make fit your needs best. And if you can think of anything else that also makes an unreliable narrator, go ahead and send us our way over on Facebook or comment down below. Thanks for being understanding, guys. Hope to see you next week.
Pen made mightier without royalty.